Thank you so much. What you just heard was a little bit of the American art form that we know as jazz. And in addition to being wonderful music to listen to, jazz is one of the origin art forms in this country. And what I mean by that is that no other style of music would exist without jazz. But jazz has other implications for our society, for our community, for our schools. Jazz is an art form that points to us the future of leadership. What do I mean by that? Well, in the tenets of jazz, there are many things that can point to the way that we can lead our communities forward. And those things, today I'm going to just talk about 3 of them: individuation, improvisation, and transcription. Let's talk about individuation. What does that mean? Individuation is basically a fancy way of saying that in jazz, individual artists have unique, diverse, individual voices. In jazz, the many great masters of the art form are celebrated not because they chose to conform, but because they chose to stand out. One of the many, many great voices on the alto saxophone was Marshall Royal, the lead alto saxophonist of the Count Basie Orchestra. And Marshall sounded a little bit like this. And then we have yet another voice, the great Charlie Parker. And he sounded a little bit like this. And still, we have another great voice on the alto saxophone, the great Julian Cannonball Adderley. And he sounded a little bit like this. All 3 of these voices emerged as pillars of the jazz canon, and not one was the same. Many times we're asked to conform, to be the same as everybody. In fact, I remember going through school and thinking, all right, I just want to be like everybody else so that I don't stick out and nobody makes fun of me. But in jazz, individual diverse voices are celebrated. But how does one arrive at such an individual voice? The answer: transcription. Transcription is how jazz musicians develop their individual voice by listening to and emulating traditional jazz musicians that have been steeped in the tradition of our art form. So what is transcription? A lot of my students ask me that. What really is transcription? And what I tell them is that transcription, simply put, is learning how to listen. And a lot of my students look at me and they say, but I already know how to listen. I listen to jazz all the time. And I say, oh, really? What many of my students end up doing is they end up hearing and not truly listening. I'll play a solo for them from one of the aforementioned jazz masters that I just talked about. And I'll ask them, what do you think makes this solo great? What do you like about it? And they'll say, well, that was a nice solo. No, what about it? What about the solo makes it unique? What makes it special? And when you can transcribe a solo, you can answer those questions. So we're going to do a little transcription experiment today. I want you to take out a piece of paper and a pen, or if you don't have one of those, just write it in your head. But I want you to write down what I'm saying in this next little paragraph here. You ready? Charlie Parker was born in Kansas City, Kansas in 1920. Charlie Parker is one of the greatest saxophonists who has ever lived. Charlie Parker died at the young age of 34. And many scholars argue that he had yet to make his greatest marks on the world. Was that easy? Was that difficult? A lot of times when I ask my students to transcribe to see if they can truly understand the content of what they are listening to, I ask them to sing along with the recording. And when you listen deeply enough to write it down or to sing along, that's when you know that you are truly actively listening. Many times in our society, in the boardroom, in the school classroom, we listen because we need to or want to respond. And today I'm asking you to change your mindset and to listen, to truly understand. And of course, the last tenet of jazz is improvisation. Improvisation, simply put, is the spontaneous open dialogue between the voices in a jazz ensemble. But the word open is the key word there. And what I mean by open is that no voice in the jazz ensemble is valued above any other. It is a non-hierarchical entity. There is no boss. And to demonstrate that, we're going to play a couple of excerpts for you. So to start off, we're going to play with just saxophone and drums. All right, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sounds pretty empty, doesn't it? I don't know that I would want to listen to that all day long. Now we're going to have just bass and piano. And we'll see how that sounds, because that was the part that was missing before, so I wonder how it sounds with this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sounds pretty empty, doesn't it? All voices at the table in the jazz tradition are honored. All voices are heard. No matter if you're the CEO or whatever you consider to be the lowest rung of the ladder, all voices should be valued. Can you imagine what our world would be like if everyone listened the way jazz musicians listen on the bandstand? Can you imagine how our society would change? Can you imagine what wonderful things we would get done? Jazz, in a word, or in a sentence rather, can be summed up as the art of listening and spontaneous interaction. But that interaction has to be open. I would invite you to open up your boardroom. I would invite you to open up the hierarchy. I would invite you to open up your ears, not to listen to respond, but to listen truly to understand. What if our world looked a little bit more like what you see before you? What if we all lived in light of the tenets of jazz: individuation, transcription, and improvisation? I don't have the answer to that right now, but I think you do. And with that, I invite you to join me on the bandstand. Thank you.